Woo, I am almost caught up with GAC videos. Something I can't say has been the case for the last 6 months, really. Um, yeah, so last video we were talking about, movie theaters and Netflix, and man, I think I might actually continue that train of thought. So yeah, I do think that eventually people will start to go back to movie theaters. The problem is I don't think that though many, if any, movie theaters are going to be able to survive long enough for that to happen, because even if we get a vaccine in November, December, January, February, that vaccine isn't going to be widely distributed until middle to late next year. Because remember, medical professionals, at risk people, they're going to get it first. And they should. 100% they should. But I don't know if it is going to be widely available enough for everyone that wants one to get one. And then for those people to trust it enough to want to go to a movie theater. Believe me, I hope I am wrong. I know that a number of companies have already put into motion means for distribution of a vaccine if and when it is approved. There are two companies that will be likely applying for emergency use authorization from the FDA in November and or December, Pfizer and Moderna. Pfizer says November, Moderna says December. That would be great, but we all know that best laid plans or Murphy's Law, anything that can happen will happen. So November, December is rather optimistic. I'm generally a set the bar or set your expectations low kind of a guy. But I hope I'm wrong. But even still, even if we get a vaccine in November, I sincerely doubt that it would be made available to all 300 plus million citizens of the United States before, at the earliest, spring of 2021. Look, there is light at the end of the tunnel. We all knew that eventually we were going to beat this thing. We haven't beaten it yet, so let's not count our chickens. But we all knew or know that we will eventually beat this stupid fucking thing. And I saw another article today that suggested that it is likely that COVID becomes an endemic, much like the flu. Something that we will never be able to fully cure, partly because there's so many fucking strains, partly because it's seasonal, and, Northern Hemisphere is in the summer, Southern Hemisphere winter, and vice versa, Southern Hemisphere summer, Northern Hemisphere winter. It's always winter or fall, or not fall, but it's always winter somewhere. And the flu is a largely seasonal thing that affects people during the winter months. So there is always going to be a flu strain out there. Likely also the case for COVID. There is always going to be some sort of nasty COVID virus out there. So it'll be an endemic. It'll probably end up being an endemic, which is, I guess you could say, tolerable, because then, much like the flu, you'll get a seasonal or yearly vaccine. Now, granted, when you get your flu vaccine, generally it is a prediction of which strain or strains are going to be active in the coming winter. Some people get their flu vaccine and they end up getting the flu anyway. And that is because it is a guess. Because you cannot produce 300, 400 million, half a billion vaccines for a flu without knowing what it is. So there has to be a little bit of a prediction there. I would be surprised if the flu vaccine predictions are right more than 50% of the time. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get one. In theory, especially if you are particularly susceptible to the flu or viruses or have a weakened immune system or have a pre-existing condition, you absolutely should get the flu vaccine. I am by no means an anti-vaxxer. No, I do not think that vaccines lead to autism. I would sooner attribute autism rates to the use of cell phones. I would sooner attribute autism to cell phones than I would to vaccines. Because people don't realize it, but there is a lot of radiation in certainly major cities and in the atmosphere. You don't see it, you don't smell it, you don't taste it, but it's fucking there. Make no mistake. So I would sooner attribute autism to something like that than a vaccine. Again, vaccines aren't foolproof. They are not cure-alls. Even things like HPV vaccine, and HPV is no fucking joke. There are at least hundreds of different strains of HPV, and the HPV vaccine does not protect against all of them. No vaccine is going to protect against everything because there are multiple different strains of everything. That's just not how science works. There are companies that are working on quote-unquote universal vaccines to a lot of things. But, I mean, I think that is a great goal to strive for. I'm certainly no scientist or doctor, but I don't know how practical that really is. So unfortunately, you kind of have to treat things on an ad hoc basis. Unfortunately, a lot of fighting viruses is reactive. Flu vaccines, they try to be proactive, which is admirable and important, but you're not going to get it right all the time. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, because you should do it. But, just understand that nothing is foolproof. It's science. Science is constantly evolving. Really by its nature. So just have to roll with it. But look, if we can get COVID under control to the point where it becomes an endemic as opposed to a pandemic, I think we, as the human race, should be more than capable of dealing with that appropriately. Yeah. So I think and I hope that's what's going to happen within the next 6 or so months, hopefully sooner than that. I did see a couple of headlines today that Congress, specifically Speaker Pelosi and the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, have made what seem to be very significant strides in the next coronavirus bill, the relief bill. We may actually end up getting one without trying to get too optimistic or get too ahead of myself or ourselves. We could very well have one by the end of the week. And I saw an article that people give more of a shit about a coronavirus relief bill than they do the Supreme Court nominee. Imagine that. Should really come as no surprise that people give more of a shit about not going broke, not starving, not dying, not losing their jobs than they do who fills Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat in a hastily organized confirmation for a replacement. Don't get me wrong, this Supreme Court seat is very important, just looking at the balance of the court, but I think it should be done after the election. Okay, next time.